It never starts with an announcement. Not with something this big. It starts small, almost too small to notice. A quiet comment. A moment that doesn't quite fit. The kind of detail most people scroll past without a second thought. But every once in a while, one of those details refuses to disappear. This was one of those moments. At first, it lived in the background. A clip. A movement. A reaction that felt off. Not wrong enough to trigger alarm, but not right enough to ignore. The kind of thing your brain flags without explaining why. For months, it stayed that way. Until someone who wasn't supposed to speak finally did. Not a blogger. Not a conspiracy account. Not someone chasing attention. Someone who had spent decades inside the system. Close enough to see what the public never sees. Trusted enough to be present at moments that were never meant to be questioned. And when he described that day, not with outrage, not with accusation, but with something far more unsettling. Discomfort. Everything changed. Because discomfort, from someone like him, doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from contrast. From noticing when something familiar suddenly isn't. From recognizing when the rules, the ones that have always been followed, are quietly rewritten without explanation. And once that idea enters the story, it doesn't leave. Because now the question isn't just what happened. It's why something so carefully controlled suddenly needed to be controlled even more. And more importantly, what was worth hiding in the first place? The difference between a rumor and a story people believe is who tells it. And in this case, the voice didn't come from the outside. It came from someone who had spent a lifetime on the inside, close enough to witness history as it unfolded, not from headlines, but from just a few feet away. For decades, Arthur Edwards wasn't just documenting events, he was part of the environment. The quiet presence behind the lens. The man who stood in the room when moments turned into history. He wasn't guessing. He was there. He watched generations grow up in front of him. Saw the shift from tradition to modernity. From formality to relatability. From distance to access. And more importantly, he understood the rhythm. Because institutions like the monarchy don't operate randomly. They move with patterns, protocols, unspoken rules that, once learned, rarely change. That's what made this different. It wasn't just that something unexpected happened. It was that someone like him noticed it immediately. Not because it was dramatic, but because it broke the pattern. In a world where access had always been carefully balanced with control, he suddenly found himself pushed further back than ever before. Not gradually, not subtly, instantly. Instructions changed. Distance increased. Visibility reduced. And for the first time in a career built on proximity, he wasn't being guided closer to the moment. He was being kept away from it. That shift might not mean much to an outsider, but to someone who had spent years watching how these moments were handled, it stood out like a crack in glass. Because when systems change overnight, it's rarely accidental. It's intentional. And intention always has a reason. What made it more unsettling wasn't just the restriction. It was the contrast. Everything that had once been open, structured, and quietly predictable suddenly felt controlled in a different way. Tighter, sharper, less about tradition, and more about management. And that's when the tone of the story began to shift. Because once a trusted insider stops describing what they saw and starts focusing on what they weren't allowed to see, the absence becomes more powerful than the evidence. And absence, when it appears in the wrong place at the wrong time, raises a different kind of question. Not just what happened, but what changed. To understand why that shift mattered, you have to understand the system it disrupted. Because this wasn't just about a modern public figure navigating attention. It was about an institution built on rules so old, they were designed for a world that no longer exists, yet still govern one that does. At the center of it all is a principle so simple it almost sounds obvious. Lineage must be undeniable. Not assumed. Not suggested. Not managed through statements or narratives. Proven. For centuries, that idea wasn't left to trust. It was reinforced through structure. Laws, protocols, and traditions layered on top of each other to eliminate doubt before it could even begin. Documents like the Bill of Rights 1689 and the Act of Settlement 1701 didn't just define power, they defined legitimacy. And legitimacy, in this system, isn't symbolic. It's biological. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Because when succession depends on something as precise as birthright, even the smallest uncertainty isn't just a rumor. It's a structural risk. History has shown exactly how fragile that line can be. In 1688, a single accusation that an heir had been secretly introduced to secure continuity didn't just spark gossip. It ignited a crisis that reshaped the balance of power entirely. Not because the claim was proven, but because the doubt couldn't be erased. That's the real danger in systems like this. Not truth. Uncertainty. And uncertainty spreads faster than any official statement can contain. Which is why, over time, the monarchy adapted, not by becoming more secretive, but by becoming more transparent at very specific moments. Especially the ones that mattered most. Births weren't treated as private family milestones. They were public confirmations. Structured. Witnessed. Recorded in a way that left no room for interpretation. It might seem excessive by modern standards, even invasive, but it served a purpose. It removed questions before they could exist. That's why every detail followed a pattern. Announcements were timed. Medical teams were known. Appearances were expected. Not for spectacle, but for clarity. So when that pattern holds for generations, it becomes more than tradition. It becomes expectation. And expectation, once established, is powerful. Because people don't just notice when something happens. They notice when something doesn't. That's where the tension begins. Not in what was said, but in what wasn't shown. Because when a system built on visible confirmation suddenly shifts toward controlled visibility, it doesn't just change the optics. It changes the interpretation. And for those who understand the weight of that history, the question becomes unavoidable. If the system was designed to eliminate doubt, why remove the parts that did exactly that? It wasn't supposed to be the moment anyone remembered. There were no announcements tied to it. No headlines waiting to be written. Just a routine public appearance. One of dozens that blend together over time. Until someone slowed it down. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The posture, the movement, the interaction. It all fit the surface-level expectations. The kind of moment cameras capture every day without question. But then the clip started circulating. Not widely at first. Just small circles. People replaying the same few seconds, trying to understand why something felt off. It wasn't obvious. That was the problem. Because obvious things can be dismissed, explained, categorized and moved on from. This wasn't obvious. It was subtle. A shift in balance that didn't match the movement. A motion that seemed slightly disconnected from the body carrying it. The kind of detail that, once noticed, becomes impossible to unsee. And once enough people saw it, the narrative began to change. Not because anyone had proof, but because for the first time, people felt like they had something to look at. Something they could replay, analyze, question. And in the age of high-definition footage and frame-by-frame scrutiny, a single unexplained moment can carry more weight than 1,000 official statements. Because visuals don't argue, they linger. And this one didn't just linger. It spread. Quietly at first. Then all at once. And with it came a new question. Not just what are we being told, but what are we actually seeing? The moment the clip spread, something subtle, but powerful, shifted. Before, people were reacting. Now, they were asking. And questions, once they start multiplying, don't move in a straight line. They branch. They echo. They loop back on themselves. At first, the questions were simple. Did anyone else notice that? Why does that look different? Nothing aggressive. Nothing accusatory. Just curiosity. But curiosity doesn't stay small for long. Because once a question is asked publicly, it invites another. And another. until the conversation stops being about the moment itself and starts being about everything around it. Why was the angle so limited? Why did the footage cut where it did? Why were there fewer clear visuals than usual? Each question, on its own, was harmless. But stacked together, they created something else. Pressure. Not the kind you can measure, the kind you feel. Because suddenly, it wasn't just about what people saw. It was about what they couldn't see. And absence, in a system built on visibility, stands out more than presence ever could. That's when the timeline started to matter. People began looking back, re-watching earlier appearances, comparing movements, noticing patterns, or what felt like patterns. Moments that once passed without attention were pulled back into focus, re-examined, reinterpreted. And with each revisit, the same quiet thought surfaced. Why didn't this stand out before? That's the thing about perspective. Once it shifts, it doesn't go back. Details rearrange themselves. What used to feel normal starts to feel staged. What once felt spontaneous begins to look controlled. Not because anything new was added, but because something unseen had been introduced. Doubt. And doubt doesn't need proof to grow. It feeds on gaps, on pauses, on inconsistencies that may not even be inconsistencies, but feel like they could be. That's how the loop tightens. One question leads to another, but never to an answer. Because answers close loops. And this story wasn't closing. It was expanding. Even silence became part of the pattern. Statements that didn't address specifics. Clarifications that created more ambiguity. Responses that felt carefully constructed, but somehow incomplete. And that's where the tension deepened. Because people weren't just asking what happened anymore. They were asking, why does every answer feel like it's avoiding something? The more the narrative tried to stabilize, the more unstable it felt. Not outwardly, but underneath. Like something just slightly out of alignment. And the audience, whether they realized it or not, had already crossed a line. They weren't passive anymore. They were participating, analyzing, connecting, building their own versions of the story from fragments that may or may not have belonged together. And once that happens, control shifts. Because a controlled narrative depends on one direction. From source to audience. But now, the direction had reversed. The audience was feeding the narrative. And the narrative was evolving faster than it could be contained. Every new clip, every missing detail, every unexplained choice didn't resolve the story. It extended it. And with each extension, the same core question returned, stronger than before. If nothing is wrong, why does everything feel like it needs explaining? Once the questions take hold, something predictable happens. People start looking for answers in places that were never meant to hold them. Not official statements. Not headlines. Fragments. Details that, on their own, don't mean much, but together begin to feel like they should. That's how the shift begins. Not with one piece of proof, but with many pieces of almost proof. A comment from someone who used to be close to the system, describing a change in atmosphere. Not dramatic, not explosive, just different. Tighter, more controlled. The kind of observation that doesn't confirm anything, but refuses to be ignored. Then a timeline that doesn't quite align. Nothing major, just small adjustments. Announcements that seem slightly out of sync with events. Clarifications that arrive just a little too late. Individually, they're easy to dismiss. Together, they start to form a pattern. Then there's the behavior. Access points that were once open suddenly narrowing. Familiar routines quietly replaced with new ones. Moments that were once shared becoming selectively visible. No official explanation. Just change. And change, without context, creates its own narrative. More fragments surface. A professional who, after being associated with a key moment, steps away from public visibility. No statement. No controversy. Just absence. Another detail. A location that typically allows confirmation suddenly becomes restricted. Information that was once standard becomes private. Again, nothing that proves anything, but nothing that explains it either. That's the tension. Because each piece, on its own, collapses under scrutiny. But stacked together, they don't collapse. They reinforce. That's the illusion, and the power of accumulation. The brain doesn't evaluate each detail independently anymore. It starts connecting them, filling gaps, creating a line where there may only be dots. And once that line forms, it becomes very difficult to erase. Because now, the narrative feels supported, not by one undeniable fact, but by many small, unresolved ones. That's when perception shifts again. People stop asking, "Is this true?" and start asking, "How much of this is true?" It's a subtle change, but it matters, because it lowers the threshold for belief. Now, even uncertainty feels like confirmation. Even silence feels intentional. Even coincidence starts to look coordinated. And the more pieces that appear, the stronger that feeling becomes. Not because the evidence is solid, but because it's persistent, relentless, always adding, never resolving. That's what creates momentum. Because a single unanswered question can be ignored, but a series of them, spread across time, across moments, across perspectives, that starts to feel like something else. Something structured, something deliberate. And whether that structure is real or imagined almost stops mattering. Because the audience isn't just seeing pieces anymore. They're seeing a pattern. And patterns, once recognized, are incredibly hard to unsee. By this point, the story no longer depends on facts alone. It depends on interpretation. Because once enough fragments have been stacked, people stop waiting for confirmation and start recognizing signals. Not loud ones, quiet ones. The kind that can be dismissed individually, but feel deliberate when viewed in context. That's when attention shifts away from what is said and toward what is shown. Or more precisely, what isn't. There was a moment, small on the surface, that changed how many people read the entire situation. No announcement. No explanation. No acknowledgement that anything was different. Just a familiar setting. A controlled environment where every detail is usually intentional. Every object placed with purpose. Every visual carrying meaning. And in that setting, something subtle had changed. Not dramatically, but noticeably, if you knew what to look for. A presence that had once been visible was no longer there. To a casual observer, it meant nothing. Scenes change. Arrangements shift. Details come and go. But to those who had been following closely, it didn't feel random. Because patterns had already been established. And once patterns exist, even small deviations stand out. That absence wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It invited it. Quietly. And that's what made it powerful. Because silence, in a system built on controlled visibility, is rarely empty. It's selective, intentional, measured. The kind of silence that communicates without speaking. And once people noticed it, they couldn't unsee it. The interpretation spread quickly, not as a claim, but as a question. Why remove something that was always included before? Why change the visual language? Without explanation. Again, no direct answers. Just the same pattern repeating itself. Change without context. Adjustment without acknowledgement. And in a narrative already filled with gaps, that kind of moment doesn't stay neutral. It becomes symbolic. A single frame that seems to confirm everything people have been feeling, but unable to prove. Because humans don't just process information logically. They process it visually, emotionally, instinctively. And when something feels intentional, it carries more weight than something that is explained. That's the shift this moment created. Before, people were building a theory. After this, they felt like they were seeing evidence. Not hard proof, but confirmation through implication. And implication is powerful, because it doesn't argue. It suggests. And suggestion leaves room for belief to grow. Now the story had something it didn't have before. A symbol. A moment that could be pointed to, revisited, shared. Not because it answered the question, but because it made the question feel justified. And once a story reaches that point, it evolves again. From speculation to conviction. Not universal, not absolute, but strong enough that people stop asking if something is wrong and start wondering how much has been hidden. By the time the story reaches this point, it isn't contained to a single moment anymore. It's alive, moving through timelines, shifting across platforms, evolving with every new development. What started as a quiet observation has now collided with something much larger, the present. Because stories like this don't stay in the past. They follow the people involved. Into interviews, into public appearances, into legal spaces where narratives aren't just told, they are defended. That's where the tone changes again. Not curiosity, not analysis, conflict. Subtle at first, then increasingly visible. Statements begin to feel more strategic than informative. Words carefully chosen, not just to explain, but to control interpretation. And that distinction matters. Because once a narrative enters the realm of control, people stop focusing on what's being said and start analyzing why it's being said that way. Media coverage becomes fragmented. Different outlets telling slightly different versions of the same story. Emphasis shifting depending on perspective. Some focusing on privacy, others on transparency. The result isn't clarity, it's division. And division fuels engagement. Because now, the audience isn't just observing, they're choosing sides. Not necessarily based on evidence, but on which version of the story feels more complete. That's how modern conflict amplifies older uncertainty. It gives it a stage, a place to evolve. Legal language begins to enter the conversation. Not direct answers, but boundaries. What can be said? What can't? What is addressed? What is carefully avoided? And in that environment, even the absence of information starts to feel intentional. Because if something could be clarified easily, why isn't it? That question doesn't need proof to gain traction. It just needs repetition. And repetition, in the digital age, happens fast. Every new appearance is analyzed. Every past moment is revisited. Every silence is interpreted. Not always accurately, but consistently. That consistency creates momentum. And momentum changes perception. Because now the story isn't just about what may have happened. It's about how it's being handled. And how something is handled often reveals more than the event itself. That's where the pressure builds. Not externally, internally, within the narrative. Because once control becomes visible, it invites resistance. People start looking harder, digging deeper, not necessarily to find truth, but to test the boundaries of what's being presented. And each time those boundaries hold, the curiosity grows stronger. Because strong boundaries suggest something worth protecting, or something difficult to explain. That's the tension at the center of this phase. A story that refuses to resolve. A narrative that continues to adapt. And an audience that is no longer satisfied with surface-level answers. Now, everything feels connected. Past inconsistencies, present responses, future implications. All part of the same evolving structure. And the question that once felt distant now feels immediate. If this is how the story is being managed today, what happens when it can't be managed anymore? By now, the story has accumulated enough weight that people begin trying to make sense of it as a whole. Not as isolated moments, not as scattered questions, but as a single, continuous narrative. Because the human mind doesn't like loose ends. It looks for structure. For explanations that can hold everything together, even if that explanation is built from uncertainty. That's where the shift happens. From observation to interpretation. All the fragments that once existed separately start aligning. The early restriction of access. The changes in visibility. The moments that felt slightly out of place. The timelines that didn't perfectly sync. the symbolic absence that seemed too deliberate to ignore. Individually, each of these could still be dismissed, explained away, attributed to coincidence, privacy, or modern adaptation. But together, they begin to suggest something else. Not proof, a pattern. And patterns invite theories. Not because they confirm reality, but because they offer a way to organize it. That's what this phase represents. The construction of a narrative that attempts to answer everything at once. A narrative where every restriction becomes intentional. Every inconsistency becomes meaningful. Every silence becomes strategic. In this version of the story, nothing is random. Everything connects. The reduced access isn't just about privacy. It's about control. The limited visuals aren't just selective, they're curated. The shifting timelines aren't just miscommunication, they're adjustment. Even the smallest details, once overlooked, are now pulled into the framework. Reinterpreted. Reassigned purpose. That's the power, and the danger, of a fully formed theory. Because once it exists, it reshapes everything that came before it. Moments that once felt neutral now feel significant. Decisions that once seemed routine now feel calculated. And the absence of clear answers no longer feels like coincidence. It feels like design. At this point, belief doesn't require confirmation. It requires consistency. And the theory, as it builds, offers exactly that. A consistent explanation for inconsistent details. That's why it spreads. Not because it's proven, but because it's cohesive. Because it answers questions that official narratives leave open. Because it fills gaps that silence creates. And most importantly, because it feels complete, even if it isn't. That's the psychological turning point. When people stop asking, what actually happened? And start asking, which version makes the most sense? And once that question takes over, the original facts, whatever they may be, start to matter less than the structure built around them. Because the story now has momentum. It has internal logic. It has a beginning, a middle, and what feels like an inevitable end. All that's missing is confirmation. By the time a story reaches this point, it's no longer just being watched. It's being waited on. Because everything now feels like it's leading somewhere. Not to a clear answer, but to a moment. A reveal. Something that finally brings resolution to everything that's been building beneath the surface. And yet, that moment never quite arrives. Instead, what emerges is something far more powerful. Anticipation. Because the pieces are all there. The shifts. The patterns. The unanswered questions that refuse to fade. The theory that feels complete, but remains unconfirmed. It creates a tension that doesn't resolve. It stretches. And the longer it stretches, the stronger it becomes. That's where the story lives now. Not in the past. Not fully in the present. But in the space between what's known and what might still come out. Because stories like this don't end with announcements. They end with exposure. Or they don't end at all. And that uncertainty is what keeps them alive. Some believe the truth, whatever it is, already exists. Documented. Archived. Waiting. Not lost. Just not released. Others think there is no single reveal coming. No moment where everything is confirmed. Just a slow accumulation of fragments until the picture becomes unavoidable. Either way, the outcome feels inevitable. Because once enough attention gathers around a single question, it doesn't disappear. It deepens. And the longer it remains unanswered, the more valuable the answer becomes. That's the paradox at the center of it all. Silence protects, but it also amplifies. Control stabilizes, but it also invites scrutiny. And every attempt to contain a narrative can end up expanding it instead. So now, the story stands at a threshold. Not finished, not resolved, but fully formed. All it needs is one moment, one piece, one confirmation that shifts everything from possibility to reality. And until that happens, the question remains exactly where it started, but heavier now. Sharper. Impossible to ignore. Was this ever just a story? Or was it always something waiting to be uncovered?